lines with all about.
Well, these journalists need to be flogged.
Which one? For
You
what
take
story?
three disparate issues,
And
jam it
jam.
up, and call it one
Are you
story.
talking about this subsidy
Mental.
story, Abby?
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought so. I'm like, what's going on here?
that's laziness.
Good morning and welcome. If you just joined us, this is Smooth 98.1. Love music, love life. It's 7:30 by our time. If you just joined us, it's time for Freshly Pressed 981. This is where we bring you detailed analysis of stories making rounds in the dailies. Of course, joining us in the studio this morning for conversations, we have Wade in the studio. Wade Himen. Good morning, Wade.
Good morning, Kayode. Good morning, Lagos.
Good to have you here. And also we have Justin EJ with us in the studio. Good morning, Justin.
Good morning.
Wow. Okay. You can be a part of our conversation. We're streaming live on YouTube. So it's youtube.com/smooth981FM Lagos. And also, please head on down to our WhatsApp page. You can send your messages to 0809-444-0981. And also, we're taking messages on Twitter as well. Use the hashtag FreshlyPressed981 to be part of our conversation this morning. So, first story comes to you, Wade. It's from the Premium Times. It talks about the CBN retaining benchmark lending rates despite the inflation. Now, to put a context to this, the Central Bank of Nigeria has again resolved to retain the monetary policy rate at 11.5%. Now, the policy rate is the benchmark interest rate at which the central bank lends to commercial banks. Wade, please, could you talk us through this? What does this mean for the regular Nigerian?
What it means is that effectively for me, what I think the CBN is trying to do is not to push interest rates, lending rates higher from them to the bank, so that it doesn't automatically increase the cost of lending out to to the individuals in Nigeria. But inflation is going up, so what the expectation I think should be is a drop in the MRR, so that at least the weighted average cost of capital of banks would drop also, if the CBN dropped that rate. However, they've maintained it for the last 2 years since 2020 because of COVID, towards ensuring that the velocity of money that continues to drive the economy improves. But with the war that is happening
In Ukraine?
in Ukraine, increase in oil prices, inflation generally rising across the world again because of all this. So I guess CBN believes that if they maintain it, then the bank's rate shouldn't go up as much as it should be. But when you look at the effects of inflation on their cost of capital, other areas
It would
of
still have to go up
it
irrespective.
might have to go up because cost of doing business will automatically go up in terms of other expenses.
Okay. Well, I know that some analysts are expecting the CBN to raise the rates to deal with inflation, but are there other ways to look at this in terms of dealing with it?
There are other ways aside from the MRR, and which is CBN itself maintaining that, ensuring that the monetary policy implementation based on these guidelines, using the CRR to push the volume of money in circulation down. So a lot of all these things, I guess they were going to do, and that's why they've maintained these rates at what they are.
Okay.
The thing is, we're in a perfect storm. Everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. So there is no one approach. And incidentally, in my view, we're not in a situation where you can be sequential about the solutions that you proffer, right? The problems are so many and multifaceted that we literally have to be an octopus right now, doing everything at the same time. And we know that
Okay.
that's also not practicable, right? So I do not envy Uncle Murphy and his boss.
All right. 0809-444-0901 still is where you can send your messages to. Let's move on to our next story. This one is from the Premium Times. Amid power supply, CBN says it's dispersed 1.3 trillion to the sector in 5 years. Now, just last week, we were talking about the collapse of the power grid. We're talking about how, they were talking about some monies have not been paid to them. But now here's the CBN coming out to say that they've dispersed 1.3 trillion. So if this much money has been dispersed, Justin, why are we still having problems with our power supply in Nigeria? Don't say if you're asking me, Namia, who are you?
Okay, you got me there because I was going to. All right, so the question one needs to look at is, it's one thing to throw money at a problem. It's another thing to be strategic about how you're solving. It seems to me that, and just from coming from the last story, the CBN's role has expanded so much under this administration because they've taken on a more and more an interventionist role. So you see the CBN in every space. So Mr. Mefele is talking about power. Next thing he's talking about agric. He's everywhere
They're trying
doing
to subsidize
everything.
things.
Exactly. And it all boils down to subsidizing stuff. So you've spent, the CBN has spent 1.3 trillion. Let me quickly remind us that the CBN is not a revenue generator, right? So this 1.3 trillion we're saying we spent, aside from the question of what exactly, where in the power sector did the money going into? Another question is, where did the money come from? Are we just doing ways and means, right? With everything? In other words, are we just printing money?
And using it to
I was
Where-
waiting for you to do that explanation.
Yeah, because it's ways and means. The CBN is basically just debiting ledgers and creating money and putting it into what effectively is looking like a black hole. Because if you've spent 1 point how many trillion, and this is not everything that has been spent, right? This is what passed through the CBN channels. Reading through the story, he talks about some of it being spent with the discos, some of it being spent in the billing meters, the metering program that they
Yes.
went on. And you start to ask yourself, didn't we privatize the sector? Didn't we actually privatize the power value chain?
Okay.
This discos and this gencos, don't they actually belong to people? So a few days ago, you had one of the industry captains, Mr. Elumelu, right? Speaking out about the general state of things. He has an oil mining lease. He also has a play in the power sector.
Okay.
These things have been concessioned. If the concessioning program was bungled, or if the realities of the market has changed, can we come back to the drawing table and talk about it? If I don't know, but Mr. Mefele says that this is how much has been spent, and still I don't have power. I have to run the gen, whether it's petrol you're using, whether it's diesel you're using. The last time I bought diesel was when it spiked to almost 750. I hear it's coming down now. There's no power, there's no diesel. It's crazy.
All right. Well, if you want to be part of our conversation, please reach out to us on our WhatsApp platform. Let's hear your thoughts on the stories we're sharing this morning. This one here from Tony from Ikeja. Tony says the ruling party and the PHCN are kneeling on Nigerians' neck, just waiting for a tap out. Where we are is it's 53.65 kobo per kilo, kilowatts per hour. Okay, so that's what Tony is trying to say. Okay, Taya comes in to say, okay, Taya's taking down his message. I guess it's very, very... Okay, so the source says, good morning, guys. The answer to our question is on the power sector is very simple. It's corruption. That's talking about Sister Delgado. And Yemi from Marina says, it appears that every sector the government claims to be spending money happens not to be working. Education is a problem, health, and power, and all the other sectors he's mentioning.
Now they want to
should be
deworm
spending-
children.
They should stop spending and start planning more. All right. And Tyre comes back to say, okay, so 1.3 trillion for more darkness. Who would have guessed that the CBN was working like an investment bank? Not me. But I remember the cost of maintaining his branches and then lamented. All right. Let's move on to our next story. This one talks about subsidy. So it comes to you, Wadi. And the story says, so FAC meets today as NNPC deductions threaten state allocations. And it's from the Punch newspaper. So the planned deduction of the 242.53 billion naira fuel subsidy from the federal account this month by the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, that Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited is raising uncertainty among states as the Federation Accounts Allocation Committee is scheduled to meet today. So, Wadi, there's been a lot of back and forth, concerning this subsidy issue. So the governors are saying, if you're taking this much out, then it's going to affect, their obligations with the states. But I don't know, is there a way that they can find a balance? Because the government is saying it's important that they take these subsidies. But the governors are saying, we have to pay salaries. We have to take care of, some of the other obligations that we have in our states. So where do we go from here?
Where do you go from here? Okay. So this is really interesting because last month, the head of the Governors Forum, Kade Fayemi had said that there was no remittance into the federation account at all by the NNPC.
Okay.
This month, they are battling on taking out 242 billion from that allocation. And each time this is done, or each time the monies that are expected in the federation account doesn't meet a certain amount, then the governors all start screaming that, oh, they don't have enough monies to pay salaries, or we can't pay the current minimum wage, which for me has always been an excuse. Because
yes, they're saying they want to revert now from some state governors are saying they want to revert back from 30,000 to 18,000.
So so first and foremost, in as much as I'm a huge fan of taking away subsidies, and if we do that, then we know what comes in and what doesn't come in at all at every point in time. But the other point for me is this: these are the same excuses every time you don't have enough money in the federation account. We can't pay salaries. That's the excuse. It's been the excuse forever. What happened to internally generated revenue in these states that are always complaining? So we've become so lazy in trying to generate revenues in our states to pay salaries, the basic things, and then we come back and blame the federal government. Some of these states, they don't have enough money. Like we continue to say, I think Justin and I have said it severally. Some states are better off being merged to other states and just running on under them, so that those we can generate more. They can better learn how to generate revenues internally and work for the people. But will they deduct this amount from? Yes, they will.
They will?
Yes, they will, because the NNPC has told. Otherwise, next month we'll tell you again that there's fuel scarcity.
Okay, and then
and then we'll go back and
if
forth.
deductions are made, right, and then some of the governors cannot meet the obligations as far as salaries are concerned. For example, if the governor decides to revert back to 18,000 because he can't meet the promises he's made, what then happens? Do we see another strike from the NLC? I mean, what then happens in that regard?
Well,
Justin wants to say something, but he's
no. Justin is not saying anything, because I myself am confused. Because at the end of the day, where are we going to?
How much did the Ministry of Solid Minerals or whatever
Contribute?
Where is the money for the gold?
Questions. All right, don't forget, we're also streaming live on YouTube, so please head on down there. It's youtube.com/smooth981FM Lagos. This is the message from Joy Ohaka on YouTube. Joy says, none of us can employ the people in government who makes decisions for the entire country. Why does it surprise us that nothing works here? Going back to our WhatsApp messages, this one here from John Kuro. John Kuro says, there's no accountability, period. It is a system that has the problem. Government do a cost-benefit analysis of sorts, and the black hole will appear. All right, that said, let's move on to our next story. It's from the Guardian newspaper, and it comes to you, Justin. Amid concerns, Buhari opens $100 million new Lagos airport terminal today. And of course, some people are already talking about how the traffic situation will be in Lagos, but it's happening today. And let's just put a background to the story real quick before we dive right into it. Like I mentioned, Buhari opens $100 million new Lagos airport terminal. But Justin, where does this take us to?
Okay, you talked about putting a background to the story. So there was a $500 million loan, which China granted to Nigeria some years ago. I think it was in 2013. And the loan was not a cash, loan. It was an infrastructure loan, all right? An infrastructure-backed loan where China would construct 4 airport terminals, right? And 5 airport terminals. So at the cost of $100 million each.
Okay.
Now it's taken, so the ones in Port Harcourt, the ones in Abuja, and about 3 of them have been completed. And we've all seen what they did in Lagos. Personally, I looked at the one in Port Harcourt, for instance, and I was like, this is $100 million. Okay, fine. It took them how many years to complete that one? So it's done now, and Mr. President is coming to commission this one. Hooray. But I have questions. I have serious questions. We know what the Belt and Road strategy of the Chinese is, and they are not coy about it. They're very open about what their strategy is. We've seen them take over. So there's a mezzanine clause. A lot of groups have been arguing or have been agitating that the loan agreement should be made public because we want to understand the PPP agreement, right? Which is a part of the loan, should be made public because people want to understand exactly what did the government commit to here. The Chinese have been known to take over critical infrastructure in some of our neighboring East African countries,
Okay.
based on structures like this. I think Kenya has suffered from this. I think there's a situation in Ethiopia, if I'm correct, in Uganda, where shipping ports, right, have been taken. But now these are the kind of infrastructure that also have a huge role to play in national security considerations. Imagine the major hub airports in the country, Lagos, Abuja, Kaduna, being taken over one day by the Chinese because they gave you $100 million loan and you defaulted. And with the way we are going with all this, where's the money to pay salary? Default is not exactly out of the question here. Now, did we commit ourselves
Is there
to a
a
situation?
time frame now that there is no open? I mean, you've talked about making this public now. Now that we don't know the details about the agreements. Is there a possibility that this could happen, in the coming years? Because we're talking about how we're struggling to pay salaries, subsidy issues, and then if there is a takeover, what then becomes of what's the tenor, the duration, what happens?
I think we should send an email to Uncle Mefi. We might have an intervention plan that we don't know about.
All right, 809-444-091. And also, we're taking messages on Twitter, so please head on down to our Twitter page and use the hashtag FreshlyPressed981 to be a part of our conversation this morning. Okay, so let's get back into the story, but first, let's go on a quick break. When we get back, we'll do some more talking.
We're not on air, are we?
Because people wake up one day. You see, in Kenya now, they have
You
China
wake up
is taking
one
over
day
police
and you
stations.
have no country. Your president will be Chinese.
I mean, the thing is, you look at the thing that they tell you that
Are you okay?
No, I have no problem with taking
substandard
The problem
infrastructure
is
because it
this,
turns
some
out
of these
into
contracts.
Okay, so
we should
this
have
one,
finished them
after the first four stories, we'll go on a break
8
because
years
this is sponsored by
to
Shona
terminal.
Metrics.
5 years
And
to commission the one in Port Harcourt. and
Normally it's
Asaba.
at 50, but we finished before that time.
This one has
What
66
did you
checking
do? Did you
counters.
stop it?
How many flights do you run?
Don't stop it.
Even the one that has
video.
6 and one carousel, you can't manage.
It's just that people go and sell us. People go and sell us down the river, get their personal perks out of those deals, and come back, and then years down the line, just like the,
97 for it.
yeah.
That's how it has been now.
This is still Smooth 98.1. Love music, love life. If you just joined us, well, you're still part of Freshly Pressed 91. We're talking about stories making rounds in the dailies. And to be a part of our conversation, as always, still, you can reach out to us on our various platforms, which is WhatsApp 0809-444-0981. And also on our YouTube platform, we're streaming live. It's youtube.com/smooth981FM Lagos. Justin and Owade are still with us here this morning. The next story talks about WAEC, and it's from this day newspaper. So WAEC blacklists 35 schools over examination malpractices in Rivers State. The West African Examination Council, they blacklisted 35 schools in River State over involvement in examination malpractice, and it was revealed in a letter signed by the Deputy Registrar and Zonal Coordinator of the Council on behalf of the Head of National Office. But this brings into a wider conversation what the plans are for WAEC, and I'd like to know your thoughts about this, Justin. Where does this go? So they've blacklisted them. I'm at a loss for words, in fact.
Well,
They blacklisted them, so then what happens after this?
what happens is what has always happened, because we tend to look the other way with these things. They didn't say they shut down the schools. Those schools will continue to host students, conduct classes, but they will not be eligible to register those students for WAEC. So what would happen typically is when the students get the
final class.
the window classes, right? Whether it's the junior or the senior one, they typically go register with another institution and write the exam there. Now, if you want to stop this, you need to block that loophole. So if you didn't do minimum 1 year or 2 years prior to the exam window in any institution, you shouldn't be able to write that exam there unless you're transferring directly from another eligible institution. There are ways to block these loopholes, but hey, I mean, you hear things like special centers. That's where this is coming from.
Okay.
And
Because I was
to be
just
fair,
going
it's not
to go
just
there.
River State, right? But
It
the
happens in
wind,
Lagos.
yeah, the cane is coming down on those in River State right now. But it's a nationwide problem. There's a crisis in the education sector. People have normalized, and this is one situation where I'm not just going to talk about the authorities. Parents go and pay monies for children
Special
to go
centers.
to special center. What is special about the center? What are they doing there? If somebody stands in front of the class and is reading out answers to people, that's what a special center is.
But now they've clamped down on River State. And we, like
Yeah.
you mentioned, it's something that's spread across Nigeria. Do you think that blacklisting is enough? Or outside blacklisting, do you think an outright ban would have been recommended? Because like you've mentioned now, the people can still register in that school, learn in that school, and then when it's time for the examinations, they'll be transferred to another school. So there really isn't any difference, if you ask me.
I don't believe him. You like banning. Well, you describe it.
I'm just saying.
But like I said, there needs to be a multifaceted approach, right? And it involves all stakeholders. Why I say I'm not going to outrightly say go for banning. So ban what? Ban that school. We don't have enough places of learning, right? The issue here is not the place of learning. It's what's happening during exam windows. And by the way, word on the street is WAEC officials are deeply involved in what goes on. So if you look at it on a per school basis, you're looking at only one side of it. So I wouldn't say ban. I would say tighten the loopholes that are being exploited.
All right. Well, I have more to say.
And parents need to do better.
All right. So 0809-444-0981. Now let's move on to our next story. Let's talk about dispatch riders, and this from the Guardian newspaper. So dispatch riders protest extortion, multiple permits in Lagos. And so the story talks about how hundreds of dispatch riders yesterday barricaded the main entrance of the Lagos State House of Assembly complex in protest against multiple extortion by the state government and some agencies of the federal government. Now the protesters, consisting of men and women, displayed placards with various inscriptions saying, "We're not lazy Nigerians," amongst other things, and they prevented visitors from the complex. Bob, Wade, talk us through this.
It's for me. It's always very sad when I hear these kind of things. Why? Because everybody is trying to make a living, but the government and the people in authority continue to collect monies left, right, and center. There's no central point of saying, okay, if I pay this, how does it go across to everybody? FRC will issue a license, which you call a national license, for you to be able to ride an Okada in Lagos or drive a car. If you're a professional driver in Lagos, you still need to go get another professional driver's license in Lagos. So all these things, we continue to wonder, where do these monies go to? Are they part of the monies that are going to the federation account, and how do you share them for providing those services within those states? Because if this is just monies that come from the FRC, who are the ones who are by law to issue driver's licenses, then what happens to the states that coordinate all those things, where you have your facility, where you have to run the infrastructure and so on? So when you look at this, it beats me that legislation would not look at the number of all those things. There are like 4 different bodies collecting monies from dispatch riders. NIPOST you have to pay 10,000 naira.
To NIPOST, and then you also have to pay for some.
You have to pay 1,000 naira to FRSC. You have to pay to the local government. You have to pay to the state government. We're just paying, and nobody sees nothing from this money.
Does this mean that there should be like a centralized type of payment, where one levy is just paid as opposed to paying to different bodies? Because these different bodies, represent different things. For example, one of the riders said that they pay a rider's card of 2,500 in Lagos, and then they also pay another one in Ogun State.
Yeah,
so if it was centralized.
So we're saying rider's card. I have no problem with the rider's card. If you want to be a member, or if you want to practice as a logistics rider in Lagos, there's a fee you pay. That's fine. But because of what happens, you have places, the demarcation of when you cross a particular party in Ogun State,
Yeah.
and then they will ask you how come. So how do you ensure that there is proper relationship between states authorities in managing these things? And this, it's a lot. So you pay here, you pay there, and at the end of the day you get frustrated. Vehicles are seized, bikes are seized, and you just continue paying. So how much do you even make from this?
In one word, though, short-term solution.
All the parties should come together and agree on what the fees are and how it's collected and how it's remitted across board.
All right, thank you so much for that. Got messages. We see those messages dropping in. We're going to get to them as quickly as possible, but let's talk about this one. So, court sacks 20 Cross River lawmakers over defection. This from the Premium Times. Justin, what are your thoughts about this?
It's very clear in the Constitution. The Constitution says that an elected official shall not cross to another party unless, amongst other things, there is a clear breakdown in the party platform that they were in
But
as
is
of
there
the
a
time
clear
they were
breakdown at
elected.
the moment? Because we see a number of people that's been defected, or that's defected, and then the courts have, decided to sack 20 of them.
Every day for the thief, one day for the Constitution. So aside from it being embedded in the Constitution, it's been tested previously in the courts, right? So in the present case of Cross River State, the Judge Taiwo of the Abuja High Court, says clearly that the conditions under which this might be entertained under the Constitution were not met, and therefore all of you that cross-carpeted, please be real, carry your load and go home and drop the party tickets. But then, yes, here's one thing that made me smile when I read it. The PDP is being very sneaky with this one. PDP submit, part of their prayer was that the court should allow them submit a list of people to replace the people who are being sacked. So I'm like, so if you're submitting a list, does that mean that it's no longer representative of the will of the people? Shouldn't you be looking at
Re-election,
some way of by election within the party or something, right? So that the people who are being represented do have an opportunity to say this is the person we want. Because what you're essentially saying is you're just going to sit down somewhere in the party caucus and write a list of names, and then they are going to school out there and say they are the representatives.
It's part of the electoral bill.
All right. Real quick, though, let's take some messages. Yemi from Marina says, please, please, please. The larger question is, how relevant is JAB in these times? If our education sector works, all these fake tests of knowledge are not needed. It says, God bless Nigeria. This one from Bamidele says, China has never taken over any infrastructure in Africa due to loan defaults. Your analysts should do their research properly and don't rely on clickbait. This one here from Emo says, once again, our hardworking government have the best way forward. Ban then. A critical look to detect the root cause of the problem is too much work. Tyra from Aja comes in to say, I should be protesting how dispatch riders drive recklessly after the extortion process of this course. Ife Peter comes in to say, on extortion of motorists in Lagos, Lagos State encourages touts more than any state governments in the country. You can imagine what bikes and bus drivers go through in Lagos. Sometimes it's as high as 35%. Anambra made moves to stop this completely. And this one here says, please don't be surprised at all, but because if the government is not part of the extortion, they would have acted fast. And that's according to Emeka. This one from Olabode. Olabode says, you didn't cover all the fees that riders pay. That's why they didn't cover all the fees the riders pay. Even in Victoria Island, these guys on Mufti collect money from the riders too. They pay both government and non-government tax collectors. Different levies basically, and that's from Olabode. Real quick, they were totally out of time, but Wadi, in one word, I want to ask you this. Kaduna imposes 24-hour curfew on council over deaths of 23, burning of 70 homes, from the Guardian newspaper. We've seen this too many times.
Yeah, especially
and that's
especially in the Kagoro area, and it's I really don't know what the governor and the security operatives are doing there. So really.
All right. Thank you so much for that. You can find our analyst up on social media. Also, we see your messages on YouTube. We're sorry we can't take all the messages. Joy comes in from Joseph from YouTube says, this multiple taxing by dispatch drivers is a real matter. It's just sad how we have made gods of various bodies, especially in Lagos. Something needs to be done about the Lagos transport system. And Joy Uhaka as well comes back to say the major civil service in other countries comprise of the best brains, the FBI, CIA, Navy, police, NHS. They hire the best into their parastatals. Like I mentioned, you can find our analysts up on social media and continue the conversation with them. Tag us in while you do that. We are at Smooth 91 FM. On all social media platforms, but you can also find our analyst at justin.ej on Twitter and at wadi underscore hime
Wadi Ahimi underscore.
Wadahime underscore on Twitter and across all platforms as well. Thank you so much, guys. Stay with us. There's more to come in a few more minutes. It's going to be the grapevine at 8:15.